"Sorry, but you can't work here. It's nothing personal. It's just, you know how it is." The phrase cut the restaurant's kitchen air like a sharp blade, while 34-year-old Roberto Silva was firmly held his resume in his trembling hands. Manager Brad Morrison had not even looked at the documents. His eyes rapidly traveled Roberto's appearance, the still noticeable Brazilian accent, the dark skin, the calloused hands of those who have worked hard their entire lives. "Our customers expect a certain standard. You may find something more suitable in the corner market." Roberto Silva never imagined that his civil engineering diploma, won with so much sacrifice at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, would be treated as a useless role in the streets of Chicago. 3 months in the United States, and every door that closed on his face carried the same silent message: "You don't belong to this place." The week before, he had been rejected in a construction company only for his accent. "Our customers would not feel comfortable working with someone different," said the supervisor, without even disguising prejudice. In the bank, when she tried to open an account, the manager made him wait 2 hours before reporting that, "Unfortunately, we do not have adequate products for your profile." "Thanks for his time," he answered, with an education that annoyed Morrison even more. The manager expected anger, despair, anything that justified his discrimination, not that calm dignity that made their own actions seem small and cruel. While walking down the main street, going through bright showcases of stores that would never hire him, Roberto did not realize that he was being observed. Across the avenue, sitting on a discreet BMW, David Richardson accompanied the whole scene with growing interest. At 52, the businessman had built a real estate empire valued at $300 million, but lately a strange restlessness took over him. Maybe it was the tense conversation at yesterday, when his college daughter Sarah accused him of living in a bubble of privileges. "Dad, you have no idea what real life is like for people who were not born with your last name and skin color," she had said, dropping the fork on the plate tightly. "You buy apartments for millions, but you never needed to look for a job being judged by the color of your skin." Her words echoed in her mind as she watched Roberto came out of another establishment with empty hands. David has always considered himself a fair person, but did he really know the reality that people like Roberto faced every day? David made an impulsive decision that would change not only his life, but also that of many people. He kept the BMW in the home garage and 2 hours later, emerged completely transformed. Poorly trimmed false beard, simple thrift store, and fake documents identifying him as Diego Rivera, a Mexican immigrant in search of work. By irony of fate, the richest man in town was about to find out what it was like to be treated as a second-class citizen. That same afternoon, Diego knocked on the door of the restaurant where Roberto had been rejected. Morrison barely looked at him before releasing the same rehearsed speech. "We are not hiring your type here. Our customers are demanding. Maybe you should look for something more suitable for your profile." David felt the blood boil. Was that how people like Roberto were treated every day? The humiliation burned on his chest in a way that all his money had never prepared him to feel. But while Morrison laughed at the situation with other employees, something dangerous began to take shape in David's mind. That experience would not just be a passing social experiment. It would be the beginning of a lesson that would rewrite the rules of the game forever. What the manager Morrison did not know was that he had just humbled the man who could turn his arrogance into his own ruin. There, disguised as an immigrant in search of opportunity, David remained firm as one who keeps a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. His eyes revealed a dangerous serenity that only exists in those who have infinite resources and have just found the perfect purpose to use them. If this story of prejudice and shocking discoveries aroused its curiosity, subscribe to the channel to find out how a seemingly simple social experiment would become a millionaire revenge that would make some learn as painfully as possible for underestimating wrong people to cost much more than they imagined. In the following days, David deeply plunged into his social experiment, maintaining the identity of Diego Rivera in multiple establishments around the city. What he found was a brutal reality that his wealth had always protected him from seeing. No bar where he kept a corporate bill of millions of dollars, Diego was ignored for 40 minutes in the service line. When he was finally called, manager Jessica Palmer, who in the past had offered champagne during Millionaire negotiations with David Richardson, treated him with poor, disguised contempt. "We don't have suitable products for your financial profile," she said, not even checking the documents he had presented. "Perhaps a credit cooperative is more appropriate for your needs." David noted how the same woman who had flattered her investments now dismissed him as human waste. Hypocrisy burned on his chest with an intensity that all his business success had never prepared him to feel. The situation worsened when David tried to rent a simple apartment in the same residential complex where he had 3 luxury units. Broker Mark Stevens, who in the past had facilitated purchases of Millionaire properties for his company, literally laughed in the face of Diego. "Do you have any idea how much does it cost to live in this neighborhood? Our residents have a certain standard of living," said Stevens, examining fake disgusted documents. "Maybe you should look for something more accessible, much more affordable." But it was at Morrison's restaurant that David witnessed the worst of all treatments. He came back there 5 times for 2 weeks, always being refused with increasingly offensive comments. "Your type always comes back," Morrison said to employees, high enough to Diego to listen. "They never understand when they are not welcome." During one of these visits, David witnessed Morrison publicly humiliating Roberto Silva again. The Brazilian had returned, desperate, offering work for half the minimum wage just to support the family waiting for his call in Brazil. "Not even free I would hire you," mocked Morrison in front of other clients, his voice loaded with unnecessary cruelty. "My clients have standards. They don't want to see people like you serving their food." Cruelty reached a new level when Morrison began taking pictures of Diego and Roberto with his cell phone. "I will send to other establishments in the neighborhood. We need to protect ourselves from these people," he said, laughing while typing messages to other managers in the region. The drop of water came when David saw Roberto being violently approached by security guards from a departmental store, accused of theft only for examining products on shelves with his young son. The embarrassment in the face of the Brazilian engineer, trying to protect the child from the judges, aroused something dangerous in David's chest. Roberto, in turn, continued his desperate search for work. At home, in a tiny apartment that divided with 3 other immigrants, he studied English until high hours and sent resumes to companies that didn't even respond. His economies were running out, and the pressure of bringing the family grew every day. The calls of Mary, her wife, became increasingly difficult. "When are we going to gather, Roberto? The children ask for Dad every day," she said, trying to disguise the desperation in their voice. "Your friends here got a job. Why can't you?" The pressure was destroying not only marriage but also the self-esteem of the man who once designed sustainable bridges and buildings in Rio de Janeiro. Each "no" he received was a hammer in his dignity, turning a respected professional into a rejected beggar. One afternoon, when Roberto left empty hands once again from an interview, David followed him discreetly. The Brazilian stopped in a park and called his wife, his voice breaking. "Mary, I don't know what to do anymore. Maybe I should go back. Maybe this American dream is not for people like us." That night, in his $15 million mansion, David began to make strategic calls. First for your personal lawyer, then for private detectives, and finally for contacts in local newspapers and broadcasters. Each connection was calculated, each movement designed with the accuracy of a chess player preparing the checkmate. "I want a complete dossier about each person who discriminated to me," he told the private detective. "Financial history, relationships, debts, processes, everything. And I want hidden cameras where I was rejected. It's time to document this rot." David also instructed his accountant to investigate the financial situations of the establishments that had discriminated against him. What found it surprised? Many were on the verge of bankruptcy, depending on bank loans that he ironically could influence his contacts. What Morrison and other discriminators in the city did not know was that they just provoked the wrong man. Each new humiliation that David witnessed as Diego, only Alam, then a cold and calculating determination that grew inside it as a silent storm, ready to rewrite the rules of a game they thought completely dominated. A week after the last meeting with Morrison, Roberto received an unexpected proposal that would completely change the course of his life. An elegant man presented himself as Marcus Thompson, representative of a construction company that urgently needed an experienced civil engineer in sustainable projects. The proposal was too generous to be true. 6-digit salary, full benefits, family health plan, and the immediate possibility of bringing Maria and children to the United States. Roberto felt his heart accelerate. Finally, after months of humiliation, a real opportunity. "There is only one condition," said Marcus with an enigmatic smile, adjusting the elegant glasses. "I need you to trust me completely over the coming months. Some things we will ask may seem strange, but everything is part of a larger project that will revolutionize this city." Roberto, not knowing that Marcus was actually David Richardson's right-hand man, immediately accepted. What he did not imagine was that he had just become a central piece of a millionaire justice plan that would make Morrison and all other discriminators pay expensive for their despicable attitudes. Meanwhile, David intensified his investigations into each person who had humiliated him as Diego. The dossier about Morrison revealed devastating information. The restaurant was technically bankrupt, with debts more than $200,000. Worse still, Morrison had systematically fired Latin staff to hire only white people, documenting their reasons for extremely compromising internal emails. Jessica Palmer, the bank manager, was not in a better situation either. David found that she had denied loans to dozens of small Latin and black entrepreneurs, even when they had more than enough guarantees. His own corporate emails contained racist comments that, if exposed publicly, would destroy his career instantly and yield millionaire processes. Broker Mark Stevens was perhaps the worst of all discriminators. In addition to systematically denying ethnic group-based apartments, he had created a secret group on WhatsApp with other brokers called Quality Filter, where they shared photos and personal information to protect noble neighborhoods from unwanted invasions. David instructed Marcus to put Roberto to work on a specific project, the construction of a multimillionaire community complex that, by a carefully planned coincidence, would be erected exactly on the ground next to Morrison's restaurant. The project was completely real, but its true purpose was far beyond urban architecture. "Roberto, I need you to make some technical visits to the region's establishments," said Marcus, delivering a carefully prepared list that included all places where David had been discriminated against, essential part of our community impact and commercial viability study. Roberto's first visit as an official representative of Richardson Construction caused an immediate revolution at Morrison's restaurant. Suddenly, the same man who had been despised and humiliated weeks earlier returned wearing a flawless suit, carrying professional architectural plans, and accompanied by a team of technical assistants. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Roberto Silva, chief engineer of the Urban Revitalization Project Richardson," he said, extending an elegant business card. "We need to discuss how the new multimillionaire construction will directly affect its establishment." Morrison paled instantly. He immediately acknowledged the desperate beggar who had humiliated repeatedly, but now dressed as a high-ranking executive and speaking of the authority of those who controlled millions in investments. I didn't know you worked on construction," stammered, trying to disguise the growing panic. "Worked for 15 years. Civil engineering with specialization in urban sustainability and commercial development," replied Roberto with a deadly calm, observing the desperation grow in the eyes of Morrison. "Interestingly, I tried to get work here a few weeks ago, but I was told that people like me weren't suitable for their high standards." The embarrassment on Morrison's face was visible meters away. Its employees began to whisper with each other, vividly remembered the public humiliations they witnessed. The hypocrisy of the situation was exposed brutally, irrefutably, and deeply embarrassing. During the technical meeting, Roberto presented detailed plans that showed how the new complex would completely block the visibility of the main street restaurant, redirecting all the flow of pedestrians. "Unfortunately, our studies indicate that the impact on customer flow will be devastatingly significant," he said, highlighting critical areas in the project. "Unless we find an extremely creative and mutually beneficial solution." Morrison sweated cold, his hands trembling visibly. His restaurant was already on the edge of the financial collapse, and completely losing visibility would be the final blow that would send him straight to bankruptcy. "Please, there must be something we can do. Maybe we can talk about other opportunities for commercial collaboration." Roberto smiled for the first time in months, a smile that didn't come to the eye, loaded with a bitter irony that made Morrison realize exactly how underestimated that man had underestimated. "Very interesting, this change of perspective, Mr. Morrison. A few weeks ago, when I desperately needed job opportunities, you said categorically that people like me were not suitable to work here, and that I should look for something more appropriate to my profile. Now that you urgently need my professional help, your perspective on my adaptation has changed almost magically." At that tense moment, while Morrison desperately tried to fix the irreparable and potentially devastating mistake he had made, Roberto realized that he was participating in something much larger than a simple personal revenge. It was the beginning of a transformative lesson about human dignity that would echo far beyond those walls and completely rewrite the rules of a game he thought to dominate. Roberto's second visit as chief engineer happened the following week, but this time he was not alone. Marcus Thompson accompanied him, along with a small army of technical assistants, professional cameras, and measurement equipment that turned Morrison's restaurant into a true corporate shoot set. "Mr. Morrison, we need to document all interactions for our social impact report," said Marcus, strategically positioning cameras that would capture each word, every expression of despair in the manager's face. Richardson Construction standard protocol for projects of this financial magnitude. Morrison was visibly sweated as she tried to keep the composure in front of the cameras. What he didn't know was that David Richardson was watching everything live from his executive office, savoring every moment of the turnaround that had meticulously orchestrated for months. Interesting how his memory has dramatically improved, Mr. Morrison, said Roberto, leafing his notes calmly calculated. Last week you swore you had never seen me before, but here I have some security recordings that show at least 5 of my visits to this establishment in the last 2 months. The blood completely drained Morrison's face. Recordings? But no. How did you get? Richardson Construction always documents everything thoroughly before starting billionaire projects, Marcus interrupted by typing something on his tablet. Especially when they involve establishments with proven history of systematic discrimination. Our international investors are extremely rigorous with corporate social responsibility issues. Roberto activated a portable screen and began reproducing the recordings that David had secretly collected using hidden cameras. Morrison watched, horrified by his own voice echoing for the restaurant. Not freely I would hire you. My clients have high standards. Your type never understands when it's not welcome here. This is not exactly what it seems, I stammered Morrison, realizing that some present customers were starting to actively record with their cell phones. It was a terrible misunderstanding of me, a systematic misunderstanding. Roberto arched an eyebrow with mortal irony. We have detailed documentation of 17 establishments where you sent my photo, along with messages warning about infiltration of unwanted elements in the neighborhood. Interestingly, they were all owners who, like you, shared certain, very specific perspectives on ethnic diversity. The situation got exponentially worse when Marcus received a theatrically live connection. Mr. Morrison, I just received an urgent connection from our legal department. It seems that his discriminatory attitude violated multiple federal civil rights laws. Our company maintains zero-tolerance policy for business partners involved in illegal practices of this nature. Morrison realized that he was being filmed simultaneously by at least a dozen cell phones. The restaurant employees themselves seemed deeply embarrassed, remembering life of every time they witnessed the systematic humiliations imposed on people like Roberto. Please, there must be a civilized form of solving this situation, he begged Morrison, his historical arrogance completely replaced by palpable despair. I can compensate financially. We can find a mutually beneficial solution. Compensate financially? Roberto smiled with a coldness that made Morrison back physically. Truly curious, this change of perspective. When I humbly offered working for half the minimum wage, you categorically said that it would not even be free to hire me. Now that you desperately need my professional help to save your technically bankrupt business, you are suddenly willing to compensate. Marcus consulted his tablet again and announced the final sentence with corporate solemnity. Mr. Morrison, I officially inform that Richardson Construction cannot legally proceed with any negotiations while this establishment is under federal investigation for systematic discrimination. Our legal department will be contacting you in the coming hours. The devastation on Morrison's face was complete and visible meters away. Not only would lose his all clientele due to the total blockade of visibility, but now it would face Millionaire federal processes that would drain their last economies and destroy their reputation permanently. Roberto kept his documents with the same dignified calm he had kept for endless months of free humiliations. Mr. Morrison, there is something fundamental that I learned during these devastating months of search for work. Never underestimate the real potential of someone based exclusively on appearance, accent, or origin. Sometimes the person you cruelly reject today can be exactly who will completely determine your destiny tomorrow. While Morrison tried to process the catastrophic magnitude of the destruction he had created for himself, something even more devastating was about to be revealed. A shocking truth about the real identity behind Richardson Construction that would transform that lesson of humility into something much deeper, permanent, and unforgettable for everyone involved. The moment Morrison perceived the magnitude of the catastrophe he had created for himself, something even more devastating was about to be revealed. Marcus approached the table where David Richardson, still disguised as Diego, had remained silent throughout the confrontation. Mr. Morrison, there is one last person who would like to meet him in person, said Marcus with a smile that didn't come to the eye. Allow me to present the true owner and CEO of Richardson Construction. David slowly removed his false beard and adjusted his posture, becoming instantly on the billionaire entrepreneur he was. Metamorphosis was so dramatic that Morrison had to lean on the wall not to pass out completely. Diego Rivera had disappeared forever. In his place was David Richardson III, the richest man in the city, whose real estate empire controlled half of the Chicago downtown and had whole buildings with his name printed in gold letters. Impossible, Morrison murmured, feeling the world literally crumble around him. You are the dirty immigrant that you systematically humiliate for months, David added, his voice loaded with an authority that made everyone in the restaurant silence instantly. The man you said would not even be free to hire. The unwanted element whose photos you have spread maliciously to other establishments in the neighborhood. The revelation echoed through the restaurant as a nuclear explosion. Customers filmed frantically with cell phones, employees whispered shocked, and Morrison seemed to have aged a decade in question of seconds. Roberto watched the scene with increasing fascination, finally understanding the true epic dimension of the project in which he had been involved. It was not just about civil construction or personal revenge. It was about reconstructing a fairer society, brick by brick. For 3 whole months I systematically tested as people like Mr. Silva are treated in this city, David continued, walking calmly through the restaurant while cameras captured every historic word. I discovered a systematic network of discrimination that you thought was completely invisible, but it is not when you have unlimited resources to document each conversation, every message, every decision based purely in prejudice. David activated a larger screen and began reproducing recordings of at least 15 different establishments throughout the city. Morrison watched horrified as her own voice echoed in telephone conversations where she methodically coordinated the exclusion of Latin and Black candidates. Jessica Palmer of the bank, Mark Stevens of real estate, you, Morrison, and exactly 37 other establishments, listed David methodically as a promoter presenting evidence in court, all carefully documented, all criminally recorded, all about to face millionaire federal processes that will drain every penny they have. The restaurant had become a makeshift court with David as a supreme judge and relentless jury. The justice he orchestrated was mathematically perfect. Each act of discrimination was being punished with surgical precision and proportional consequences. Morrison tried a last desperate card. Please, Mr. Richardson, that was a terrible misunderstanding. I can completely change. I can hire exclusively diverse people. I can donate to charities. Now, do you want to embrace diversity? David arched an eyebrow with a deadly disdain that froze Morrison's blood. Truly fascinating as the perspective on inclusion changes radically when it is your own empire that is collapsing in real time. When it was Roberto who desperately begged for a simple opportunity, you categorically said that it would not even free it would hire. 6 months later, the complete transformation of the city was absolutely unrecognizable. Roberto had become executive director of projects at Richardson Construction, overseeing a revolutionary hiring program that prioritized exclusively talents from historically marginalized communities. His family was finally gathered in Chicago, living in one of the luxury properties David permanently made available to key employees. Morrison had definitely lost the restaurant, facing multiple federal processes for discrimination, and if she changed ashamed to a small town where no one knew her shameful story, Jessica Palmer was summarily fired and faced federal criminal investigation. Mark Stevens irreversibly lost his license as a broker and declared complete personal bankruptcy. David has established a permanent fund of $50 million specifically to combat nationally systematic discrimination, offering completely free legal resources for prejudice victims. The project has become a national model, being proudly replicated in more than 100 other American cities. True revenge, David reflected during a television interview that broke audience records. It is not simply destroying who has harmed you cruelly. It is meticulously building a world where these injustices become completely impossible to repeat. Roberto, now nationally recognized as one of the most respected and influential engineers in the region, has established a free mentoring program for highly qualified immigrants. They systematically tried to break me, he said emotionally in his MBA graduation speech, but they didn't know that people like us do not easily break. We adapted intelligently, grow exponentially, and return infinitely stronger. The epic history of David and Roberto has become a permanent legend in Chicago and national inspiration, definitely proving that underestimating human potential based exclusively on appearance or origin is literally the most expensive and devastating error that anyone can make in life. They thought arrogantly that they were excluding desperate and vulnerable immigrants. They ended up inadvertently provoking a social revolution that completely rewritten the rules of an entire city, finding in the most painful way possible that the person you reject cruelly today can be exactly who will determine your destiny tomorrow. If this story has inspired you deeply about justice and overcoming, subscribe to the channel to discover more real and impactful stories about how true revenge, when planned with intelligence and executed with dignity, always finds its way, even when it takes years to finally arrive.